Sorry, everybody.
Oh, really? Well, I mean, he was talking so I was yes. But it always usually doesn't say I don't know. So, and I forgot about the whole back of this thing.
Okay, we're gonna dive in. We had to switch computers and getting a late start, so I apologize for that. But hi, my name is Kjell Olsen. I'm a web developer at the Minneapolis Institute of Art.
And I'm Gretchen Halverson. I'm the digital program coordinator, also at MCN.
And so if anybody knows Keynote well enough to tell me how to open the presenter view on this display, and I just say play. That's really wonderful. I hope it works. And then I think I'm going to have to say show notes in some way. But we'll get started. We're here to talk about a digital map project that we did. They're seeing the same thing.
Go to your display. You probably have it mirrored. You might need to set it up as two separate so that's mirrored preferences.
Do you want to hear?
I can get started.
Yeah.
You bring like every other dongle, and that's the dongle that doesn't work, so here we are. So we had a grant that we're going to talk to you about today, and I would like to just start out with the sort of concept of how we got started, what was the kind of germ of the idea that got us there. So, what do Mexican bugs have to do with Italian paintings? A little history lesson that I'd like to start out with. So, it all starts with this red bug called cochineal. Does anyone know what the cochineal bug is? So, the small red bug was discovered by the Aztec and Mayan people thousands of years ago, and they quickly learned that the cochineal bug produced a chemical that could be used as a dye and used for paint. It created this vibrant red color. So cut to the 1500s, with the brutal conquest and subsequent colonization of the Aztec Empire by the Spanish began to see that, wow, this great red color, this dye that you've created via this bug, could probably be commodified and used as a resource for us, right? So they took over the production of the cochineal bug and began shipping tons of the cochineal bug to Europe, to textile centers throughout Europe. So meanwhile, in Europe, the fall of Constantinople in 1453 disrupted the supply chain that produced the bug, the shellfish that was used to make the bright purple color that we all know to be used for the elite. With the source of that kind of quintessential purple being cut off, Pope Pius II introduced what he called Cardinal's purple, which was really just red, and was used, it was made out of a different beetle, the Kermes beetle. So when cochineal imports began to come into Europe, they it quickly took over favor of that Kermes beetle, and the use of the cochineal bug for all of these dyes was then used to make church garments, like the red robe worn here by the cardinal in our collection, and also, in other paints, painters would actually extract the dye from textiles and use it within their paintings, which we showcase in our story. So that the red dye from a small red bug from Mexico could find its way to Europe and have such a lasting impact tells us a lot. It illustrates the impact of colonial exploits. It tells us, the extraordinary development of seafaring and trade, and it reminds us that power is often performed through what we wear. So why do we care about telling these stories in the first place? We know that, and here's change the slide. The physical space within museums really limits us, right? The walls of galleries tend to limit the amount of stories we can tell cohesively, and museum taxonomies are often reductive and exclusionary. So telling these nuanced, complex stories provides us an opportunity to look at digital tools as a means to reconcile these limitations that we have within the museum space.
And so we have these curators, we have this education department at our museum who are just brimming with stories like the one Gretchen just told us. But they can't just sit one-on-one and talk to everybody, so they wanted to produce some kind of didactic, interactive thing that could put these stories on the map and make them visible to people. And we got a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services in 2015 to start working on this project. And we started out with the goal to illustrate the connections across everything in our museum and across the world and across time. Those are sort of the basic goals.
So the basic goals that we really were able to hone was that 1, stuff is connected, 2, globalism isn't new, and 3, go see the stuff in our galleries. Obviously these goals are reductive, right? But what they really helped do was help us keep us focused throughout the 3-year grant period, which is a pretty significant period of time with staff turnover and the like. And so having these really sort of like short, snappy goals was super critical in ensuring we stayed on track, especially other things like scope creep, right? New people come in, new people want to tell different stories, or they want to focus on something new. And we all, I think, can understand this, if you just want to throw everything on there, right? You want to tell the whole story, and of course visitors and us even aren't able to necessarily digest all of that. So having these 3 really simple goals, we were able to kind of reiterate that frequently, and it helped us kind of stay focused throughout the process. So determining your guiding principles really early on and then repeating them often was super important for the success of the project. We found ourselves probably no less than 2 times in a meeting kind of coming back to these goals and ensuring that whatever we were talking about was in service of them.
And so in those meetings, there was I think the team was maybe about 8 people at any given time. We wanted the team to be a cross-functional team that included the people from all these 3 different departments. We had our learning experts, our curatorial experts, and our media technology experts at the table throughout the whole process. Meetings were about once a week, and so that's a pretty frequent meeting cadence. They were hour-long meetings, just sort of to keep things moving forward, and that we had all those people in the room really did make a difference. It was really important. We started with content. First, over the first year of the grant, was mostly developing these stories, thinking about what content to put on them. And as the content solidified, we could move into actually experiences around it. And in those early days, we tried really hard not to dive into code, not to just start writing websites, not to make apps or anything. We actually printed a lot of things out on paper and put them in physical spaces to test them with visitors, with teachers, with students and children, and to explain to other staff, maybe not directly on the team, but to show people in the museum what we were thinking through and what this idea was. So on your right is a picture of a 8 by 5 foot printed world map, sort of pointed in at the area we were thinking of at the time. And we would tape little books up on the map in different places, and those books, you could flip the pages, and that was sort of the content we were developing for this map was there. And so an educator could be walked through this process, and we could do beta user testing and get feedback and see what they were thinking. And we think that was really important to the process, is that our content developers could independently do these paper prototypes. They just had to press print, essentially, and they could walk it around the museum, show it to people at different events, and get a lot of stakeholder feedback early on.
So what we ended up with, let's hope that this will play. It's probably not going to.
Well,
I can just walk you through. So this is a touch screen that we have in 3 locations in the museum at this point. A couple on accessible kiosks and one on the wall with an adjustable mount. But we invite visitors to, can you go back?
Sure.
To select a topic below here. So we obviously were talking about the red dye from Mexico, but folks could explore the Silk Road, Asian design and influence, and any of these topics. So once they click on one of these storylines, they're going to be met with some kind of grounding principles about the topic. Perhaps you can go. So what we coined them as quick facts. So quick facts will really sort of like ground someone in the topic. You can click through to see different things. Again, Aztec and Mayan peoples first discovered the cochineal. And then we also have some short videos, animated videos that we worked on that also provide that sort of base level of knowledge that are really going to be useful once you get into the object stories themselves. So if you can click one more. So here we have the objects in feature. So you have the image of the object, and then you have a didactic sort of really closely related to the object itself, but also as it relates to the overall theme that you're exploring. And in some cases we have crossover among those, so maybe it's related to red dye from Mexico, and it's also related to the China trade in some way. And so we adjust the copy there to reflect that different connection. Again, trying to emphasize the fact that stuff is connected. It's not sort of singular in its nature. Get back on track here. So we really, as Kjell mentioned, did a fair amount of user testing throughout the process. And it also included a pretty robust evaluation process. So we had evaluation at the start of the grant cycle, in the middle with focus groups, and then after a lot of in-gallery observation. And what we learned throughout that process, especially these early learnings, was that people really enjoy brevity, and I don't think that means that they don't want to read a lot or they're not engaged, but they also want to see the rest of the museum. And I think that was important for us to keep in mind, as again, we all want to write everything about everything. And so that was an important learning for us. One of the comments from a focus group said, I like the idea of going down a rabbit hole, but not so far that I get lost. So trying to be able to bring people back when they need to. And the other thing we learned that was, I think, showed up really closely within our UX design was that people wanted grounding information. They kind of needed to be like placed within history and understand what they were learning about. And so having that grounding information within those quick facts and the short videos was really came right out of that feedback that I need some sort of like base level knowledge of this to really be able to engage in the content. So if you want to go next slide, actually. So as I mentioned, we really focused this intro slide on giving people that base level information. However, we all know that visitors sort of don't always take the path that we'd like them to take, but we were sort of okay with that. So sometimes people can bypass all of this essentially and just go straight and touch the objects within the map, because that portion is also, touchable. And so that's okay, because we also built that into the content to say that someone could just arrive at the copy of that object text and be sort of situated enough. But again, hopefully we're hoping that they're choosing this path. That was another thing I think we are still grappling with a little bit, is how much choice is too much. Again, we don't want to be too prescriptive. We want to be able to have people sort of choose their own adventure, but at what point does that limit or maybe not create the best experience for folks? So in terms of content development, like I mentioned, we tried to sort of do them in tandem with UX development because we found that a lot of those decisions from content were really influencing the overall design of the map. But we worked really closely as that cross-functional team, not necessarily having perhaps curators deliver the content. We worked together. Sometimes, one person would take the lead on developing the route information, and then we'd edit as a team to make sure we were, again, getting those goals. Stuff is connected, globalism isn't new, and go see the stuff in the galleries. One area where I think that kind of consensus model limited us a little bit, I'm not sure if anyone has created animated videos, but they're really hard, and they bring out a lot of like just personal preference in people, and so you end up, focusing on preference decisions versus is this actually meeting our goals. So we spent probably, in my opinion, way too much time focused on those types of conversations. So kind of determining when content needs to be collaborative in terms of its development, but being strategic when maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be, because we all are sort of on board with the same goals, so trusting in each other to know that they're going to make decisions rooted in those goals.
And so, to go back to the very beginning, we started testing on paper prototypes early on in the process. As we dove in and did start writing code around these ideas that had come out, we tried to test as frequently as we could with visitors to the museum. So we have this big rolling touch screen that we could position around the museum. I think one of these pictures is at a family day event where parents bring their kids to the museum, and there's a lot of programming around that. The other one is Third Thursday, which is a more young adult focused evening fun event with beers, and we would just put the screen out and have a couple of team members sitting at a table next to it, guiding people into the experience and watching to see what happened and how did it all work, writing down notes or letting people write down their own feedback notes. So we really tried to trust our users, and you can't trust somebody that you don't talk to, so we needed to talk to them a lot. And we did the same thing with staff members who weren't necessarily on this team. We tried to have this out in the open as much as we could, to be talking with people from our organization. A lot of these were the curators who maybe had a really great idea for an object to add into a certain story, or something that they thought would be really interesting to focus on that they could then bring to the content team, and the content team could drive the process forward.
So if you want to go back, actually, so this installation you see in that photo was actually within our a gallery dedicated to the spread of Buddhism. So we worked really closely with our curator to say, how can we tell that story using this map, and worked really collaboratively to make sure that that content was developed in tandem, meeting the same goals that we had. But we found that that was a really great way, by talking with curators about what installations are you doing, what ideas might you have about this type of approach, because they often have these amazing stories they want to tell, and then this visual approach using that digital tool was able to really bring that to life. And I think having then the proximity to the actual objects that are featured in the map was a super win for us, because that third goal, right, go see the stuff in the gallery, they were maybe able to just turn and go find those actual objects right within their space.
Cool. So I'll just quick speak to the technology. We wrote this as a single page JavaScript app, which means there's a little bit more browser interactivity than a standard website, but it's still a web-based tool that at some point we could send out to classrooms for use in different places. It isn't an app that someone has to do all of this work to download on their phone. The content was actually, the content team dove in so early in the process. They were writing all of this stuff out in a very complex, structured spreadsheet. We just kept that spreadsheet and exported it to a CSV file, which we then translated into JSON, which is what powers the data side of the app. Here's a picture of the spreadsheet. It's sort of, it did what they wanted. They put all their GPS locations in one header and all the names of things, and there's probably 250 rows going down the spreadsheet of all the different tidbits of content. We're planning to translate that spreadsheet into a set of static markdown files, which are sort of a text-based document that people will read. But we haven't really had a explicit need to do that yet, so the spreadsheet is still alive and it works well.
So in terms of the key learnings, I think a couple just to highlight is determining your guiding principles early on was super critical to the process. And meeting frequently with that cross-functional team to make sure no one sort of like looped in at the last minute or not sort of aware of what you're working on. Making those paper prototypes and talking to your users frequently. Certainly these aren't groundbreaking, but things that we really found to be successful. And I'll just leave you here with the next slide to bring it back to the original reason we did this. So anthropologist Arjun Appadurai explained that it is by following the trajectories, the often complicated and nuanced paths of objects, in this case a small red bug, that we can interpret the human transactions and calculations that really enliven things and make things and the objects within our collection so valuable to us and our visitors. So by exploring the things and their movements like bugs, we can better understand the expansive and interconnected nature of our histories. So thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, there's about 4 minutes.
Was it all kiosk based? That's what I saw in the photos.
Yeah, so we have a wall-mounted map that presented actually some issues from an accessibility standpoint. It's really low, so we've added a adjustable mount to make that a little bit better because of the reach implications. But then we have 2 kiosks that I think maybe there was pictured in the second slide, that were sort of slanted. You could wheel under there if necessary. I think we do have some more opportunity to do additional testing about the best mode. The larger you get with the screen, the more accessibility implications you have, which is, I think, a challenge for us. So I think we'll continue to sort of evolve maybe the ways in which we present it. Again, it's available online. You can just, it's a URL. So we've done our best. We've got some mobile friendliness to do, but it's not a terrible experience even on your small phone. So thinking about maybe where are the other instances we could implement it.
Do you know how your content team dealt with sort of geographical ambiguity?
Yeah, that was
hard.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about it. I think what, in terms of like the actual map that displays, it's a contemporary map.
Yeah.
But in other instances, like our video of the spread of Buddhism, we were really sort of careful to know where that kind of Siddhartha was born and all of these implications, and not drawing those country lines in that case, because when you're sort of situated in that history, maybe those contemporary lines are not relevant in that case. So I think we tried to be a little bit situational about it. When does it make sense to have them? When does it not? But I don't think we necessarily had a perfect way to deal with it.
From a data nerd perspective, all of our objects just have a country. We don't have precise GPS coordinates. So these dots were chosen by the content team to put things sort of in the right place.
And that was another question too, like, do you put the object where it was created? Do you put it where, like, it's, maybe the materials came from? Do you put, and ultimately we said, like, where was its origin of creation was the place we'd want to put it, but that doesn't always tell the full story that we wanted to tell, so it's kind of a balance.
Sorry, I don't know the size of your building, but did you have a challenge with wayfinding within your physical space in connection with the trails that you're presenting in this interactive?
So our building is medium. It's pretty big. There are 2 large, complex, confusing floors. There are 3 of these kiosks we've identified, and they're all sort of in central corridors. And the one sort of wayfinding clue we have right now is on each object, there's a little cutout of our map that matches the printed map you can see. So if you can see that, you can pull your paper map out and you can kind of find your way to where you're going.
Yeah.
I think we have a mix of, we want people to be able to get to these objects, but we also want them to maybe wander through and see something that will surprise them on their way.
That was another thing we had to think about. We originally selected objects that would be on view most frequently, but then we found that that could also just be limiting in terms of the stories we were telling. So I had an asterisk on that for that last goal of go see the stuff in the gallery, because of course that's a great thing if you can do that, but we don't want to necessarily limit the stories we're telling based on whether it's on view or not. So thank you.
Really good. I could see as well. That was a real treat.
I didn't want to dive too much into the technology, but I'm interested to hear, do you use a pre-generated tile, do you use a SVG map?
Yeah, just seemed to me was the most important.
I think I've seen it here, and you've got 5 floors, and you have sort of
Yeah, and some of them, sometimes a lot of the floors are situated differently between the levels depending on how you got. It's very.
You're doing the 10 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay, we've got a gap, so practice.
I know.
So I'm after you.
Yeah.
Don't mind, so I'm just gonna
Sure.
see my, not looking for anything, just
Okay.
gonna disturb everyone with some noise.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. So yeah, noisy
I
we can
think
get.
the little screenshot there has generated thumbnails of that. It actually runs the script when it goes through and finds all the.
I think I'm good, but if I'm like
The Palace of Whitehall.
running right along, which I don't think I will, like feel free to like
Until it was destroyed by fire.
look very concerned or wave your arms or.
I just thought it was
Whatever.
people prefer.
Yeah.
And then they broke all of that structure, so now we're. Okay.
Is it good? Okay.
It'll do.
It'll do.
It's fine.
Yeah.
All right, I just wanted to.
Okay. You just turn the light on.
Yeah, that's all.
We were. In this project, we're actually using a service that generates tiles. We decided. Yeah. That was that box, and it's not that. Yeah, I should have. That's just like the most important thing. I really should have. Well, if you want to get technical stuff, I'm very happy to anytime, including right now. But we originally were using something called MapZack, which is very similar to use leaflet to generate things. going up a little bit by $1 or $2 every month. Yeah, it is being adopted and used. So we're sort of thinking about, maybe there's a programmer who works for the Hewitt who does tons of cool map stuff. And he is using an open source version of this company that went out of business it was called MCN, and they gave away their map tiles for free, and they had a really cool technology stack, but their business model didn't work, so they're not a company anymore, but all of their open source code is being adopted by people. So he generates all of his tiles, he pre-generates tiles, he says, for this bounding box, generate this set of tiles down to this level, and then he puts those on his server, and his map just talks to it.
Dutch.
So it's like build your own box across the box. You don't have, it's not